Episode 1. Say nothing to no one, when silence is taught within the family. The first episode of Beyond the Silence begins before domestic abuse is named. It begins with the environment in which a child learns what can be spoken about, what must remain private, and what happens when family boundaries are crossed. Long before a person encounters an abusive partner or a professional attempting to understand their circumstances, they may already have developed powerful beliefs about loyalty, secrecy, and disclosure. These lessons are rarely delivered through formal instruction. They are learned through observation, repetition, and the responses of adults when difficult subjects arise. For me, one of those lessons was expressed in a sentence I have never forgotten. I remember standing in front of my mother as a little girl, her long index finger pointing towards my face as she told me, "You say nothing to no one." What has stayed with me is the contrast between that instruction and another moral lesson I had also been given. You never steal, you never lie. As a child, those messages created an unusual distinction. Honesty was presented as a fundamental moral principle, yet there were circumstances in which certain truths were apparently not to be spoken outside the family. The lesson was not necessarily that lying was acceptable. It was that truth itself could become conditional when family loyalty was involved. There is an important difference between privacy and secrecy. Families are entitled to privacy, and children need to understand that not every personal conversation should be repeated. The difficulty begins when privacy becomes an obligation to conceal information, particularly when the child becomes responsible for protecting an adult, preserving the family's reputation, or preventing outsiders from knowing what happens within the home. Research into childhood disclosure demonstrates how powerful these barriers can be. NSPCC evidence identifies fear, shame, uncertainty, concerns about consequences, and difficulties obtaining an appropriate response as important barriers to children telling others about abuse. Earlier NSPCC research also found that more than 80% of young adults who had experienced significant childhood abuse had attempted to tell someone, demonstrating that silence and attempted communication are not necessarily opposites. This is an important distinction. A child may communicate indirectly, make a passing comment, behave differently, ask an unusual question, or tell someone something without possessing the language to describe the significance of what they are experiencing. If the adult does not recognize the communication, the child may conclude that speaking has achieved nothing. For me, silence became something I fell into. At school, I hardly spoke, to the extent that the headmistress at my early school days raised concerns with my mother that I might be mute. My mother later laughed about the meeting as she recounted it to her friends, not caring for my feelings. Family secrecy can also shape a child's understanding of history. My experience involving my younger half-brother illustrates this particularly clearly. He was told that his father had died because of alcohol when, in reality, his father had been murdered. The significance was not simply that he had been given an inaccurate explanation. It was that adults had controlled access to his own history. He received a narrative that appeared complete because he had no reason to know that information had been withheld. Discovering such information later can therefore affect much more than knowledge of a single event. It can cause a person to reconsider who knew what, who decided what they were allowed to know, and whether other parts of their history may also have been concealed. This is why family secrecy needs to be understood relationally. The issue is not that every secret is damaging, or that every private family contains hidden abuse. The question is, what function the secrecy serves, and what burden is placed upon the child. If secrecy protects ordinary privacy, it may be entirely appropriate. If it prevents a child from seeking help or protects harmful behavior from scrutiny, it becomes something very different. The instruction "you say nothing to no one" can therefore become more than a childhood sentence. It can become a relational rule about safety, loyalty, and belonging. A person may understand intellectually, decades later, that they have every right to speak, while still experiencing an emotional sense that speaking is somehow disloyal. Before we ask why an adult did not disclose something, we therefore need to ask a more fundamental question. What did that person learn about speaking in the first place?